Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the continuing series of free classes that I've been offering to my friends. It's a pleasure to do these for all of you. Glad to share some knowledge and hope that y'all get a little education out of this and can take some of these things back to your daily jobs and make things a little bit better. So this class is or session or training, whatever you want to call it, is the second in a series. And I did the regular pivot tables class a couple weeks ago already, and now what we want to do is take the knowledge up another step. We want to go pivot tables intermediate. That's basically what would come after basics or introduction. Before we get too far into it, for those of you for those of you maybe attending the first time, or if you've just discovered this video on YouTube, my name is Scott Kinsella. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, and I specialize in all of the Microsoft Office and related products, basically all the end user stuff like SharePoint, Office 365, Windows, and basically anything in the Microsoft Office suite. That is what I do for a living. I've been teaching this stuff for over 22 years. I've been working with Microsoft Office since like version 4.3 that came out back in the 90s. I live in Rockville, Maryland currently, which is in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. You can find me on my professional website at www.kinsella.net. And well, if you're watching this on YouTube, you already found me, and you can find my other videos on my channel there. Again, just look for my name. So what is our agenda for this evening's class? Well, this looks like a short agenda, but there's actually a lot of stuff that we want to do tonight. I always hate using the terms intermediate and advanced because they don't really tell you what the class is about. Unfortunately, on the other hand, giving a class a really, really long title is also not practical. So let's kind of here's what we want to cover. First off, I want to do a quick review of the basics from the introduction class. Not going to go into as much detail as I went into in the intro class. And if you have not watched that video yet, I'd highly recommend that you watch the introduction to the basics video that's out there. So we want to review some of that stuff just to make sure that we're all on the same page and we're all thinking the same thing and so on and so forth. Then the rest of this session is really about three main topics. And it's basically sorting, grouping, and adding calculations. Those are the three topics that I want to cover in this quote unquote intermediate class. It doesn't seem like a lot, but there's a lot there. And we're going to spend a lot more time in this session going through examples. In the introduction section, half of that class was lecture just to get you through the basics. With this, we got a lot more examples to get through and so on and so forth. Okay, so again, a quick review. Then we're going to take a look at various types of sorting that we can do in a pivot table. We're going to look at various types of grouping of data that we can do in a pivot table. And then lastly, we're going to show you how to add other types of calculations to your pivot table. Okay, all right, let's do our review. So first off, one of the main things we talked about in that intro class was how should the data look when I'm trying to set up a spreadsheet that I can then at least turn into a pivot table. There are two main things that we have to take into consideration. And one is how does the data look? And the other is how's the data organized? And here are the four key points that we want to have in mind for how the data should look. So first off, let me drag this spreadsheet over here so you can see it. So there's our spreadsheet. And let's talk. So first off, if you're going to analyze data, if you've got stuff in Excel and you want to analyze this with a pivot table, there's some things you need to do first. First off, you want to make sure that the first row of data is labeled headings. So looking over here, sure thing, the first row, and it could be the first row in your sheet. It may not be. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I could have started this at row 6. It just makes sure that the top of the data, you've got well and clearly labeled labels up there at the top for each column. I'd recommend keeping the names short. Now, that doesn't mean you have to get obnoxious with abbreviations, but I also wouldn't have really, really long stuff up there either. Secondly, you want to make sure that each column of data is a consistent type. So what we mean by that is if this is a column of text, make sure that it's text all the way. If you have a column of dates, make sure it's dates all the way. And especially with numbers, make sure it's numbers all the way down the list. You don't want to have any cells where you've got something like NA written there or some sort of text. That's going to cause problems when you create your pivot table. You're better off having a blank cell or having a 0 in the cell than you would if you had some text there, okay? So especially in a number column, don't have text entries because that's going to cause an issue. You're better off having a 0 or an empty cell, okay? Third point, make sure you don't have any blank rows or columns in your data set, all right? This should be nice and tight here. There should not be any blank rows and there should not be any blank columns, because if you did have those, that's going to cause problems with your data analysis. Lastly, minimal formatting, okay? It's not going to hurt anything if there is formatting here, but you're wasting your time if you are formatting this information, because this is just data. Nobody's really going to look at it. You're not going to print it out. You're not going to be pasting it on a wall. It's just meant to be data. So you don't need to get all fancy schmancy with formatting. It's really, really unnecessary. Okay. All right. Now, in the intro class, this next slide was the hard part, and that is, how should the data be organized? All right, first up, we just talked about how it looked. Now we actually want to get into the details of how should it be organized. All right, first thing, the order of the data rows doesn't matter. Okay, yeah, looking at this data right now, you can see that yes, all the California entries are together and all the Washingtons are together and all the Oregons are together and so on and so forth. And that's all well and good and nice. The reality is, though, is it doesn't have to be that way. If I'm going to add more entries, I should just tack them on to the end, okay? Don't get all in this business of trying to keep things in order, because again, this is just data. We'll put things in order in the pivot table, and we're especially this evening going to talk about sorting. So we'll deal with sorting over when we've got the actual pivot table. Okay. Secondly, the order of the columns doesn't matter either. Okay, as long as I could have this order here doesn't make any difference. All right. I mean, it's good to keep related things together if you want, so it's easy to look at. But again, just like with the rows, the order there really has nothing to do with anything, because you're going to organize things in the pivot table itself. Do not get hung up on trying to organize stuff too much here. Okay, I mean, it's okay to organize a little bit. I mean, I'm very OCD about things like that, and I do like some semblance of order and organization, but I'm also not going to get hung up on it on this data sheet, because I know it's not necessary. Then these last two things are the hard part, and that is the data needs to be that each row is just one single data point. Now, what that doesn't mean is that that there should only be one numeric value. When we're talking about a single data point, what we're really saying here is that everything in this row, no matter how much stuff I put here, all of it should describe either a single order or a single transaction, or all be one thing, or what we would call a single data point. Okay, I would not want to have an additional column here called sales 2, because I might maybe have another sales number from January, or sales 3. That's already the indication that there's a problem, that you're doing something wrong. Okay. An easy way to kind of compare this is look at when data is not organized properly. If you look here, I've got this row of California data. Right? Here's another way to present this data, and it looks like it fits most of the rules, but really when you look at it, no, it doesn't, because we've got multiple data points here of the sales in January, February, March, and so on and so forth. This does not, this organization of data here is not going to turn into any sort of pivot table. You're going to really have a problem with that. Okay. Again, I could do a whole half hour on what it truly means to have data that should represent, that your rows should represent one data point, and that this is what it means to have normalized data. It's a whole class in and of itself. And if you attended the intro class or you've watched the intro video, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's, again, really, really important that the data be normalized before we try to analyze it, or you're going to have issues. Okay? All right, then, okay, how do I create a pivot table? Well, easy enough. First off, you're always just going to click somewhere in the data. It doesn't really matter. Just come over to your data list and just click anywhere. The second step is the optional step. And again, in the intro class, we spent a bunch of time on this. And I'll give you the quick rule here, or what we're talking about. You may optionally, before you create a pivot table out of your data, you may want to turn your data into something called a data table. This is an especially valuable step if you plan to add more data to the list later that you want to be included in the analysis. There's a quirk of how pivot tables work and that the data that they pull, that if you don't format your data as a data table, your added data might not get included if you're not paying attention. Again, this is an optional step. I do it every time anyways. Even if I know I'm not going to add more data, I do it every time anyway. So that step, doing that real quick, I'm just going to click anywhere on the data. So that was step one. Step two, I'm going to go to the Insert tab. And again, before I go to Pivot Table, I'm going to do this one here called Table, or basically data table. Click it. Excel is going to guess where my data table is. It made a correct assumption. I'll click OK. And there, now I can tell I've got a data table. Now there's way too much formatting here. I don't like all this. Notice now I've got a new tab up on the ribbon called Design for Table Tools. I'm just going to come over here to Table Styles and just knock that back down to plain formatting. All right, so now I've got my data table. That was step two. Remember, this is an optional step that I would highly recommend. All right, step three, insert the pivot table on a new worksheet. That was the easiest way I could say it. Try to cram it into the smart art graphic here. But basically, I'm going to go to the Insert tab, click Pivot Table. All right, it figures out where I want to pick up my data. Generally, all of the defaults here are probably what you're going to want. So I'm going to click OK. There we go. Now I've got my layout. All right. And then step four, start laying out the pivot table as desired. Drag the fields and create your pivot table. All right. Again, this is a real quick summary, but I just wanted to review all that sort of stuff. Okay. So there's our quick review of the basics. Okay. Going back, remember, we've got 4 things to remember about how the data should look. Okay, then we've got a few things to remember about how the data should be organized, and then the basic process of creating a pivot table. It's not hard. Once you get the hang of it, it's like old hat. It goes really easy. Okay, fantastic. So now that we've had our quick review, yay! Now we want to actually get into some of the topics for this session. And the first major topic that we want to get into is sorting data in a pivot table. After this point, I'm not going to have a lot of slides because this is so example-based. I was just not going to write out slides for every single one of these. So I've got a little summary here of the things I'm going to cover, but the slides are not going to be as important. By the way, you can download this presentation from my OneDrive. The link is posted in the chat window, and I will also include this. You should see it in the YouTube description as well. You can pick up this file and all the other ones from other trainings. So the first major topic that I want to cover is sorting our data in a pivot table. All right, so let's come back over to here. We already kind of got started with what I wanted. And I'm just going to create a real quick basic pivot table here. So let's put, let's see, what did I put in my instructions here? All right, I want region. And then I'm going to put state here. Okay, we'll put the months across the top. That's fantastic. And then I'm going to put sales down in values. This is all pretty standard stuff, just dragging things from the pivot table field section down to where I want them to appear in the sections here below. Let's blow this up a little bit more so you can see it. One of the first steps I would recommend after you've created your pivot table is to change this layout. The default layout that Excel uses is kind of cruddy. So I always go up to the Design tab. I come here to Report Layout, and then choose either outline or tabular. I despise compact form. That's the default, and there's no way to change this. It's clunky, and it's very, to me, user unfriendly. That's my opinion. I much prefer outline or tabular form. So I'm going to go with outline form there. That's much better to look at. Let's zoom back out. Okay. Now, before we do sorting, let's also do another kind of standard let's do another quick refresher here with all this business in here with the numbers. Just to refresh, whenever you create a pivot table and then drop values into it, no matter what type of formatting you might have had over here on your numbers, when you do a pivot table, all of your number format, pivot tables do not pick up any formatting at all. You basically start from scratch. So there's another reason why formatting the raw data is just a waste of time. Now, I would like to format these numbers, but as we said in the intro class, I really shouldn't highlight the cells and format them. Why is that a bad idea, audience? Anybody remember or know? Why is this a bad idea? Why should I not highlight cells C5 through I21 and just apply a format? Anyone got an answer? Somebody's typing a message. Why is this a bad idea? Well, I can kind of easily show it while somebody's typing their answer there, in that if I do something like this, what's the problem? Yep, there's the answer. Thank you, Julianne. Yeah, you would just end up formatting the cells. And one of the things about pivot tables is that they can be very dynamic in their layout. And you might not format the right thing if you do that. See, as I'm moving this around, things wouldn't be formatted correctly. So we don't ever want a direct format in a pivot table if we don't have to. Well, then how are we going to format this if that's the case? Well, the way to do that is that we have to come over here into the pivot table fields panel, and we want to select down here where it says values, and I want to go to the sum of sales, and I'm going to click its drop down. And I want to go into the value field settings. Okay, there's a bunch of stuff here. Now, this is going to come back later. I love to do foreshadowing in my classes, and this is some foreshadowing. There is a bunch of stuff here that I'm going to come to later. Later on, when we get to the adding calculations, we'll deal with this summarize values by and the show values as. We'll deal with that when we get to the adding calculations part. But for right now, I want to go to number format, and then here we go. Here is the format cells dialog box, and here is where we can format this stuff. Another dirty little secret. If you do want if you want dollar signs, right? These are sales figures, so these represents money. Most of us think that's a currency format, and that is true. But one of the dirty little secrets of Excel is that when you click the dollar sign up here, you're actually applying the accounting format, not the currency format. The main difference is where the dollar signs are positioned. In currency format, the dollar signs are right up against the numbers. In accounting format, the dollar signs line up on the left side of the cell. I like the accounting format as the default. I think it looks nicer. It's just much more organized. So we're going to pick that. There we go. That looks quite lovely. Okay. All right. Again, kind of review. Now let's get to some things that are new to us. Well, first off, some basic sorting. All right. And that is in that any of these fields that do show up on here, such as region, state, and month, and so on and so on and forth, we can sort by those values. We can sort by those labels. Okay. And again, this is a good reason why you want to switch your pivot table to either the outline or tabular layout, because you get these drop downs to help you. Right now, yes, everything alphabetized itself as we would figure is that we've got A to Z in the region and we've got A to Z in the state. But let's say for some particular reason I want these in reverse order. Well, to do that, I can click the drop down on any field. And there are the two basic sort ascending and sort descending options, or A to Z, Z to A options, right there at the top. So I can just sort by region, and you know what? Let's put the states in reverse order as well, just for fun. There we go. Basic sorting, nothing crazy there, right? All right. Again, all I got to do is just click on the drop down for the label and choose a sort. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. But there are other ways that we can sort things, okay? And one is, let's say I would like to sort by the totals. That's a little different. You know, in looking here in each of these regions, obviously, you know, we've got different grand totals over here. And what I'd really like to do is I'd like to have these in order by highest to lowest, okay? And if I came over here to the drop downs and went to more sort options, there are ways that I can do that. I can say sort ascending, okay, A to Z by, instead of by state, I'm going to click the drop down here and say I want to sort by the sum of sales. Okay. So now this is going to put the highest one at the top and the lowest one at the bottom in each one of the groups. Let me show you how I got there again. Okay, so I'm going to go to, let's say I want each of these groups, I want the states to be in order by the grand totals over here. Okay, so I'm going to click the drop down here for state, and I'm going to go to more sort options. When I get this box, all right, now I can do ascending or descending. I'm just going to do ascending, A to Z, and instead of sorting by state, which is the label itself, I'm going to click the drop down and say sum of sales. Now I'm going to say OK. And now when I look, oh, sorry, I did these in ascending order. Sorry, I said that backwards. Here we go. Now when we look at it, if you look in each one of these groups, the lowest amount is first, and then the highest amount is at the bottom. Okay? Did them in ascending order. Sorry, I was speaking backwards there. You know, up and down is so difficult for me, right? Left hand is the one that makes the L. Okay, anyways. So you can see here, and if numbers change, or I refresh things, or I add more states, or I add more months, or whatever, everything is going to stay in that order. Okay? Even if I apply filters, it will also stay in order. So for instance, now, oh, sorry. Okay. Now, right now, I just did that in order by the subgroups, okay, by the states. Maybe also I'd like that to have happen on the regions. Now, if we look right now, the regions are just in alphabetical order. But I could very well also put the regions in order. Now, it just so happens by pure chance that the regions are in order highest to lowest. So let's flip that around, okay? Same steps. I'm going to click on the drop down for region. I'm going to say more sort options. And for region, I want to go ascending by sum of sales. Say OK. There we go. So now we're in order by region, and we are also in order by, and within each region group, it's in order by state. Okay? So this is an additional way to sort, is that we can sort by values instead of sorting by the labels, because we're used to sorting by labels. We've done sorting by labels for a million years. And that's easy to find here as well. This one's a little trickier to find, all right? And that's what these more sort options are. Now, I'm not going to touch months for a reason. I want to talk about that stuff later, so just ignore months for right now. But I do want to continue on with what we've got here. Okay? All right, so looking at this now, again, I can change any of the sorting at any time. If I want to go back to A to Z or Z to A on here, all right, there we go. Now my regions are back in order, just alphabetical. But again, within each region, they're still in order by the values, the sum of sales at the end. Okay. All right, I could switch that around. Let's go to more sort options. Let's do that descending. Okay, now the highest ones are at the top. Okay, uh, there's lots of fun stuff that we can do with that. All right, and again, even if something is being filtered out, so for instance, if I take out the central region, all right, let's take this out, it's all still in order. Okay, no matter what we're showing, it's still going to be, the order is going to be maintained no matter what you are or are not showing. Okay. All right. Now, the next kind of sorting that we want to take a look at is what we call manual sorting. So let me just put everything back to normal here. So let's just sort A to Z, and let's just sort this A to Z so that we're just all back in typical order. Another way to sort things, which takes a little bit more time, is maybe you want these in a particular order that's kind of, for lack of a better word, it's random. Okay, maybe for instance right here, looking at this, I've got east, central, and I got central, then east, and then west. And really what I'd like this order to be is I want this to go east, central, then west. I'd like the east group to be first, then central, then west. Okay, so what I can do to change that is I can click on the cell. Okay, because there's no sort that I could do to get that. A to Z or Z to A is not going to get that. And even if it could, well, the point here is I want to show you how to move stuff around. So I'm going to click on the east cell, and then I'm going to put my mouse right on the edge of it, just like I was trying to, just like I would be trying to move a cell in the spreadsheet in general. And I'm going to drag east. Now, now that I've got the edge of the cell and I'm trying to drag, look at that little green line that's following. Wherever I drop that line is where that's going to appear. So if I move this green line up here, now I've got east, central, and west. All right, maybe I want to move west up. All right, fine. I'm going to click on the west cell. You want to get right on the border, not so you see a fat plus sign. You want to see the thin plus sign. There we go, the thin plus sign with a pointer. Then start to drag, and you'll get the little line indicator. And now I can put this wherever I want. So let's put it right there. Okay. So this is manual sorting, because sometimes it needs to be in a particular order. Maybe it needs to be in order geographically. And so we've got to go east, central, and west. So let's move central back up. All right, so let's click on central. All I'm doing is I'm just clicking on the label. Then I'm putting my mouse right on the edge of the box. It doesn't matter where. I like doing it from the top. Then I'm going to click and drag. I'm going to follow that green line and then drop it where I need to drop it. Okay. Now, again, I can even order within the group. I can move things around and say, okay, you know what? Florida should not be at the top here. It's a southern state. So I want to put Florida towards the end. So again, just like before, click on the Florida cell, get right on the border of it, and just drag it down. Okay. Let's see. We got Arizona, California, Oregon. All right. Let's put, I don't know, let's put Washington up towards the top. Okay. And let's move Missouri up 2 slots. Okay. You gotta finesse this just right, but basically now I can put these in any sort of order that I like. Okay. The trick is to make sure you click on it just right. You want to get on the border of the cell so that you get the 4-headed pointer, and then you can move stuff around. Okay, so that is a manual sorting of the stuff that we've got there. Now, let's talk about that manual sorting. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that this is a type of sort that I need all the time, maybe in multiple pivot tables. I have lots of different data sets, and it just so happens that, look, in a lot of these reports, I need them to always come out east, central, and west, or some sort of particular order. okay? And maybe, yes, in a small example like this, it's not too hard to switch them around. But invariably, what's going to happen is that it's going to be the one time you forget to put them in that particular order that your boss wants. And, then you're going to submit that report and they're going to go, there is not in the order that I want. There is a way to have Excel remember this order so that it always comes up in this order when you do your pivot table. And it's something called a custom list. Okay. All right. Before I get over there, though, there's something I want you to take a look at. And that is right here. Look at the months. We don't think about this and we often just assume, but looking at this pivot table, what order are these in? Okay. So looking at this pivot table and looking at the months that are there, so this is an audience question, they're in a particular order. What order are they in? This seems like a silly, obvious question, or I should say, that's right, they are in calendar order, but let's think about this for a second. How? How are these in calendar order? How or why? Because they're not in alphabetical order, are they? Right? Think about this. These are labels. They're text. They're not numbers. So shouldn't they have been sorted A to Z? Okay, well, maybe. Yeah, Excel is smart enough to go, okay, yeah, I see these are months. I see what you're doing. You're going to want to have them in month order. The reality is, though, is that, yeah, it's, well, how do I say this? It's not as smart as you think it is, because the true trick to this is there's something in Excel that's built in called a custom list. And the custom list says, hey, when you see these text labels, they happen to be in this particular order. Months and days of the week happen to be a couple of those custom lists that are built into Excel. Now, again, the cool thing about this is you can create your own custom lists. You can have things you can create your own order of text labels. And the other really cool thing about this is this will manifest itself in other places. Here's what I'm talking about. This kind of goes back to a class that I did before, right? We can type the name of a month and drag it down, and you'll notice that Excel fills that out automatically with all the other months, right? And you're like, wow, what kind of voodoo Harry Potter magic is this? Well, the reality is it's something called a custom list. All right, Scott, you've talked about it enough. How do we do it? All right, I actually want to use a different file for this one. So let me come over here because there's more labels in this one. What was the one I wanted to use here? Okay, expenses. So let's, oops, what? Yes. Oh, no. I see. No, I want to use quarters. Sorry, talking to myself. Okay. I want to use this file. Okay, here we go. Yeah, because this one has more regions in it. So this file, oops, sorry. This file happens to have 5 regions. There's a northeast, southwest, and central regions here. And I'd like to turn this into a pivot table. And also, whenever I do a pivot table, I want the labels to come up in a certain order. Now, right now, if I did a pivot table, and there's one already here, and let's move some labels around. If you look, okay, let's see here. All right, they're coming up central, east, north, south, and west. All right, just had to do a little reordering there. But I'd like them to come up in a particular order when I do this pivot table. So let me delete this sheet for now. All right, so where do I create my custom list? All right, this is buried, so I'll go through the steps. First, we got to go to the File menu, and then we're going to click on Options. Okay, so File, and then Options. Then we're going to go to the Advanced section. And in the Advanced section, you're going to scroll down, and there's a ton of things here, but just keep scrolling, and it's almost towards the bottom. It's in the section here called General, and then there's a little button here that says Edit Custom Lists. So I'm going to click on that, and up comes this box. Surprise! This is where Excel gets the order of the days of the week and the months of the year. It's not figuring it out mathematically. It's literally been told that this is the order. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my own custom list of the order that I want things to be in. There we go. Now I got up there. Oh, that was being a little stubborn. All right, I'm going to have to edit that out, right? Okay. North, east, south, west, and central. There we go. And I'm going to add that as the list. There we go. All right, now we're cooking with gas. Sorry about that. Got myself a little spun around there. It happens. Okay. So now I have created that custom list, and that is the order that I want to see the data when I do a pivot table. By the way, again, this is going to work for anything. And also, this gets stored as part of the overall Excel settings on your workstation. So this will carry through to other spreadsheets. So you don't have to redo this every time. That's part of the magic here. This becomes part of the built-in-ish settings for Excel. So I'm going to say OK. Say OK. And let's check it. I'm going to type north. And the easy way to see that that works is to just pull down. And there we go. It's working. OK. There we go. Northeast, southwest, central. Northeast, southwest, central. So now, when I create a pivot table out of this, let's do pivot table. Okay, let's put her here. And if I put the region in the rows, look at that. North, east, south, west, central. Ta-da! So I can create a custom list so that things always come out in a particular order. Now, I could still, if I'm like, oh, well, this time I want it, I still want this to be in A to Z order. Okay, well, I can override that if need be. Sorry, Z to A. Okay, but the order is it's going to be in that order that I put it in. Oh, all right, in my custom order. So you can create custom orders if you find yourself constantly putting things in a manual order all the time. All right. Honestly, I haven't really ever used this feature myself, but I just have it in my notes as something kind of cool. Okay. All right. We need to move on. So let me close this file. I'm done with this one. Don't save. All right. And that's all we're going to do. Oh my goodness. Excuse me. That is all we're and that is all we're going to do for sorting. Okay, sorry about that. All right, next, let's come back over to our PowerPoint. Next topic we want to cover is grouping data. So, grouping data. Well, sometimes, we naturally created some groups here, and that's based on, other data that's already in there. But sometimes we want to do different types of grouping. Maybe the groups don't exist in the raw data, or we want to create numerical groups on the fly. There's lots of other types of grouping that we can do. So we're going to take a look at three main examples here when it comes to grouping. We're going to look at grouping by date. We're going to look at grouping by number ranges. And then we're going to look at basically grouping text items, which is similar to manually sorting or basically creating our own groups on the fly. Okay. All right. So let's start off with grouping by date. So I'm going to need a different file for this. So let's bring that one up. And that is this one. Behold. Okay, so here we go, different sample file. In this sample file, I've got a very, very basic set of data, nothing spectacular. It's literally just every day I've written the sales. Now you can see this is a really old sample file. And I'd like to create a pivot table out of this. Okay, I absolutely can. It fits all the rules. The data is normalized. It's got headings. Heck, it's even got a data table on it already. So I'd like to create a pivot table out of this because I'd like to do some summary information on. I'd like to summarize this. So we go through the usual steps. We click on it, go up to insert. Now it's already a data table, so I don't have to do step 2. So I can go right to step 3, which is pivot table. All right, all this stuff is good. Usually the defaults are everything that I want. So I'm going to click on OK. All right, and I come over here now. We don't have a lot of fields to deal with, right? But at a minimum, we always need 2 in a pivot table. We always need at least a row or a column, and we need some value to analyze. All right, well, I only got 2 things here. So what do we want to put where? Okay, so now I've dropped date on the rows, and now I'm going to put sales into the values. Okay, well, now wait a minute. This doesn't look like a decent pivot table. This looks like the same information that I had over on the data sheet, doesn't it? This doesn't tell me anything or do anything interesting. Well, the thing is that dates are a type of number, and Excel is smart enough to do grouping for these. So what we can do is I'm going to come up to the Analyze tab, and I would like to group by these dates. I'd like to see this by month. Okay, so I'm going to click on, just going to make sure I'm clicked anywhere on here. It doesn't really matter. Right? Don't select the whole thing, by the way. Just click one of the cells, because if you click the whole thing, if you get this deal, the group field will dim out, and you'll be like, wait a minute, I can't do what I want to do. That's fine. Just click on one of them and then say group field. Now, depending on the type of information that's in the in this column, a different box will appear, and we'll see that when we do our next example. But right here, Excel is smart enough to see that this is a date, and now it's basically saying, okay, here's the first date, here's the ending date, and when we've got dates, here's a way to group them. All right, well, it's giving me what I want, right? I would like to group by months. That makes the most sense, doesn't it? So let me go ahead and click OK, and now my data is grouped by months. Or is it? Is this really what I want to see? There's a little problem here, isn't there? Did you happen to notice, audience, did you happen to notice how many years worth of data were there? Let's go back over to the data sheet. Okay, there's 2008, and now just to go to the end real quick, it's 2009. So there's 2 years worth of data here, 2008 and 2009. But when I come over here, am I seeing the data the way I thought I was going to see it? Or what's going on here? I said, show me it by months. But what happened? Is this really what I want? No, it's not. What happened? Well, all the Januaries have been combined, and all of the Februaries have been combined, and all the Marches. I have 2 years worth. Here's the trick. When we often as humans say we want to see something, we want to see our data by month, what we're actually really saying is we want to see by month, by year, right? You have to tell Excel that. So let's come back up to the group field button. You actually need to select both months and years from this list. You can select more than one, because if you just select months, it's going to combine all the months, all the Januaries together, all the Februaries together. And if you have multi-years worth of data, it's not going to come out the way you might think it would. Okay. So now I'm going to click OK. There's what I really want to see. I want to see this by month. Now, a couple of interesting things, something interesting happened when we did that. If you look over here in the pivot table fields, a new field called years has been created. So I can actually now move that years field around to make my pivot table look more nice. That was terrible grammar. Make it look nicer, okay, more readable. And now, like all the other things, I can go to design and say, okay, report layout, let's put this in outline form, that's better. Okay, let's format the numbers so that they are in accounting format, blah, blah, blah. Voila, that looks a whole lot better. Okay, So remember with dates, question, why did it say the end date was 1/1/2010? Because it added one. It's a weird quirk because it's doing the whole group. Yeah, Julie's like, wait a minute, when you did the grouping, let's come back over here on this field. Yeah, why did it say 1/1/2010 when there actually isn't that date? It's just doing the next day. Excel is drunk. Isn't it always? Well, maybe not drunk. I usually say Excel's just a little tipsy. Word is the product that's always drunk. It's an odd quirk. It's just picking the next day higher. I think it has to do with the whole equal to or greater than type Boolean logic, something or other. But yeah, it's a little odd that it includes the next date, even though it's not actually in there. Point being, though, here, whenever you do groupings by date, do consider that how we name things or say things in English doesn't always match up with Excel. So if you do want to see things quote unquote by month and you have multi-years of data, what you're actually asking for is by month by year. Okay, or by year by month, I think is the right way to say it. So make sure when you're grouping, you select both of those. And you can do years, quarters, days, hours. These are more time-based, seconds, minutes, hours, days. Days, months, years, and quarters correspond to dates. All right, so that's one kind of grouping that we can do there. Okay, all right. Let's do another type of grouping that Excel can do for us that's very similarly related to what we just did here with dates and grouping by those units, is that numbers can also be grouped in basically frequency distributions or whatnot. So let me open up another file. I know all these example files. Voila. Okay. And we'll go to the one that's a data table. And we're going to create a pivot table out of this. Okay, let's zoom in. Now, looking at the data table here, this is bank information. I got a whole bunch of information, transactions, what type of account was opened, who it was opened by, the branch, the type of customer, and so on and so forth. And actually, what I'm really interested right now is we've got all these great amounts here. But I'd kind of like to know what's kind of the distribution of these amounts. Like what were the small, how many small ones do we have, how many big ones, and so on and so forth. And when if I come over here to this pivot table and I put things in like branch and account type, and then I go, okay, well, let me put the amounts because that's a value. If I stick it down here in the values area, well, the problem is I'm getting a summation of the values, all right? And that's not really what I'm looking for. I need the actual values to somehow be summarized. Well, again, pivot tables can pretty much handle any field in any position. We don't have to put numbers in the values section. We can put numbers in other places. So I'm actually going to take the amount and stick it in the rows. Now what that's going to do is it's going to create labels of every value that's in my raw data. Now that's going to create a huge pivot table here, okay? Now we're going to use the grouping stuff that we just learned, and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to click on any one of the labels here. I'm going to come up here to Analyze, and I'm going to say Group this field. Now notice I haven't stuck anything in the values over here yet. That's fine. We'll need something eventually, but I'm going to click on Group Field. Now this box looks a little different, similar to what we had before, but looks a little different. So in this case, I can now start at a certain number, what's the highest number, and then what type of groups would I like to have? I can do anything. Where do I want to start? Do I actually want to start at 0? Do I want it to go up to 100,000? So let's do that. Let's start at 0. Okay, let's go up to 100,000. 100,000, and let's group these by $25,000 increments. Now I'm going to say okay, and look, now I get a series of numbers over here. Okay, the groupings. Now for some decent analysis, now I can put amount back over here in the values again, And it's actually initially going to give me a count, which we can change that. So right now with my pivot table, what I know is that there were 688 transactions that fall into this 0 to 24999 group. There were 9 that fall into this group, 7 in this group, and 8 in this group. Okay, let's change the design of my pivot table. Put this in outline form. That's a little better. All right, well, those groups are a little big, so let's change our groupings. Let's go to group field, and instead of by 25,000, let's go by 10,000s. There we go. That's a little more interesting. Okay, a little more expanded. So now I can see that the 0 to 9999 amounts, there were 441 of those. Now again, notice this is coming up as a count. I'll show you later when we get into adding additional calculations, which will be the next set. I'll show you that we could actually do the sum and say, okay, how much was that? Right now it's doing a count because of various factors, because of the labels that we're doing here. But the overall point is that I can still take numeric values or numeric fields and drop them in a row or a column. More commonly, you're probably going to put it in a row, and then I can group it. Heck, let's take this down. Let's go by 5,000s. That's going to make a bigger pivot table. There we go. Now we've got by 5,000s. Okay. Now that's giving me more information. We call this a frequency distribution is basically what we're doing here. We're creating these groups, and it's basically creating a frequency distribution, which you could also then turn this into a chart later. You can do something called a pivot chart, which we'll talk about those in the advanced class. Okay. All right, and then again, we'll come back to this example in the next section, and I'll show you, well, how do I actually do see the sum of the amounts and so on and so forth. So we'll come back and look at that. Okay. All right. So now let's go on to yet another type of grouping that we can do. So I need yet another file. Okay, so let's go to the employee list file. Got all these files open. So much stuff going on. All right, there we go. Got a list of employees here. And hey, this one's all text. Can I make a pivot table out of it? Sure. Sure can. All right, so let's do insert. It's already a data table. Great, we'll make a pivot table out of this. Put that over here. And let's put our location in the rows. There we go. And let's put sex up along the top, and then let's count the sex. So we're going to stick that in the values section, and we'll go report layout and in outline form. Okay, so now I know that in the Arizona field, in the Arizona office, I got 5 women, 15 men, and so on and so forth. Now, looking at this, I would like to create some groups, okay? The trouble is, and that in looking at the original data that's here, I don't have a lot of other information that I can create groups off of. All I've got is employee names, locations, and the sex, okay? In reality, I would like to take my different states and divide them into regions. Now, the right way to have done this is that the information would actually be over here, okay? I should actually have a column here that says region, and for each one of these states, I should have the regions over here. Let's say, for the sake of argument, it's one of two things. Maybe I don't have time to do that. Maybe it doesn't come that way, whatever. There could be myriad reasons why you can't add the region column over here. You can't do it yourself, whatever, okay? That would be technically the right way to do it, so that it would be easier to manipulate in the pivot table. But let's just say for some reason that we can't add that extra column of data, but we can still create groups. And in this case, we're going to create manual groups. We're going to create them just like we could do manual sorting. Now we're going to do manual grouping. All right, so I'm going to take 3 of these states and put them in a group. Now we're going to use a standard selection trick like we would use in Windows to create this group. And that is when I want to select, and let's see who knows this. If I want to select different items that aren't next to each other, and I want to do it with the mouse, what key on my keyboard can I hold down to be able to select different cells that aren't next to each other? Anybody know? Control. Yay! Somebody got it on the first try. Didn't have to prod the audience for that. Yeah, we use the control key. So here's what I'm going to do. I want to take Arizona, and then I'm going to hold down the control key, and I want California. I'm sorry, I want, okay, Arizona, California, and Washington. Now okay, there we go. I've got those 3 selected. I'm going to come up to Analyze, and now I'm going to select up here on the Analyze tab. I'm going to go Group Selection. All right, notice Group Field isn't highlighted and is not available because there's no way to do this. Excel will be like, I don't understand what you're trying to do. So I'm going to click Group Selection. And so what it's going to do is it's going to take those 3 that I grabbed and make a group out of them. Now, what it actually does is that it will then take the rest of them and stick them in just a second group. So if I had all the states here and I grabbed 3 of them, that would be group 1, and then all the rest of them would be group 2. And I could continue to create more groups as needed. So if I needed to create 3 or 4 or 5 different groups here, I could do it. I would just have to keep going and keep selecting the ones that I want to make into groups. Now, once I've done that, the problem though is I end up with these clunky things here that just say group 1 and group 2. Well, that's not very helpful for me right now. Well, I want to give these realistic names. So all you have to do is just click on the cell and just start typing. It's a little strange, but just start typing what you want to call this. So I'm going to call this the Western region. And then this here, I'm just going to click on it. We're going to call this the Eastern region. And let's make this a little wider so I can see it. And there we go. So now what I've done is I've created groups on the fly for each of the regions. Okay. Let's go back to, where do we have that data with quarters? Let's come back over here. Let's say, for the sake of example, let's pull region out of here. Yes, okay. And here's another example where we've got a bunch of states, okay? And let's say, again, for the sake of argument in this file, let's pretend that the region is not there, that we don't have it. And I want to create my own regions, all right? So let's grab, let's grab Kentucky, Florida, and what's another southern-ish state that's here? Let's just grab those 2, and I'll make a group out of that. So to Analyze, Group Selection. Okay, and then I want to take Washington, Arizona, California, and Oregon, and let's make a group out of that. Okay, so notice I just have to keep going here. I just keep grabbing the values here. Now this looks really messy, and by the way, make sure you're grabbing the group names out here, not these states. Again, I know it looks strange. Let's do Illinois, Missouri, Kansas. We'll make a group out of that. Group those together. And then, oh wait, Oklahoma should be in there. So let's put Oklahoma in that group. Oh boy, let's ungroup these. Let's do Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma. There's a group. All right, now Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York. We'll group that. All right, it's tedious, but you can see we can do it. So now this could be Western. This could be Midwest, not Midwest, Midwest. We'll call this Southern, and we'll call this Eastern. There you go. So I can create groups on the fly. So 3 basic ways that I can create groupings in my pivot tables. I can group by the dates. Okay, I can also do grouping, so grouping by dates. So where was our sales by date? Okay, we can create groups here. Just remember when you're dealing with dates to think in terms of years, months, quarters, and so on and so forth, not just months. Then we can also group things by numeric values. That's a new one. Okay. So it's creating like a no, I don't know if this is considered a histogram or not, but a frequency distribution or bins, okay? Similar to doing the thing with dates. Or we can create our groups on the fly. I think that was over here, all right? Again, ideally with creating your groups on the fly, you'd really want that data in the data list itself. It just becomes easier to deal with, but maybe you can't, maybe it's not available. All right. Okay. So now let's move on to our third section for this class, and that is adding calculations to a pivot table. So let me come back to bank accounts. Okay. And what we want to talk about in this section is adding other types of calculations to a pivot table. Pretty straightforward. Doing things like sums, counts, average, max, min, and then looking at different types of percentage calculations that we can add. So let's come over to the bank accounts spreadsheet, and let's make a new pivot table out of this. So I'm going to take this data, insert pivot table. Always just good to practice that sort of stuff. And let's put the branches here. Let's put the account types. And let's put the amounts down here. And we're going to change our layout. I don't like this layout, show an outline form. And why does that keep coming up count? Something screwy got into the data, because it should be coming up as sum. All right, let's switch this back to sum. Okay. And we'll go to the value field settings, format it. I know all these lovely steps. There we go. Okay, standard basic pivot table. All right, now in looking at this, I can see some information about, okay, each branch, the type of account that was opened, and then I can see all the amounts. And let's pretend that the sum of amount came up instead of the count of amount. Okay, well, I would also like to know how many these are. When I'm looking at these CDs here for the central region, okay, how many of those were there? Now, you might be tempted to create a whole new pivot table and show count on there. The thing is, though, is that you don't really and really shouldn't do that. I mean, you could. I could create yet another pivot table, but I'd have lots of pivot tables all over the place, and really I want to kind of keep everything in one place. Well, a pivot table can have more than one calculation in the table itself. We're not limited to just one calculation. Okay, so for instance, right now, I'm doing a sum. I would like to have a count here as well. Well, how am I going to do that? Because the amount is already in the value section. And now you saw me do something earlier. You saw me switch things around. I could come down over here to the values. And I remember that foreshadowing I talked about earlier? Well, I could come to value field settings, and I could maybe change the calculation, right? There are other options here. Summarize the value field by. There's a bunch of them that are available, right? It kept coming up count. I switched it to sum. But the problem is this is not a list where I can select multiple options. I can only select one thing here, right? So how could I get another calculation in there? Anybody have any ideas on how I could get another calculation in there? It's actually kind of one of those, you don't think you can do it, but you actually can. Audience, any guesses as to how can I throw in an additional calculation? It's something that might seem a little counterintuitive. No? No guesses? Okay, well, here's how you do it. I'm actually going to take the amount field and put it on there again. That's it. That's all I got to do. Now, You'll notice again, this, I'm not sure why this keeps coming up as count of amount as the default. So we're actually getting the one that we want. But there we go. Now there's a second calculation by simply dropping the same field onto the same area again. Now, something else happens when we do that. And if you look over here in the pivot table layout section, you'll notice that there's a new thing that appears over here in the columns section, and it's called values. And what that's doing is that we can't have three-dimensional pivot tables. So the third thing that we're adding here has to go somewhere. And basically Excel defaults to putting it in the columns. I don't like that. I think it makes a really wide pivot table that I don't think is easy to read. So personally, again, my personal preference, I'm actually going to take this values and move it down here to the rows. I think this makes more sense to look at, okay? So now I can see that for the central branch that we had $1.3 million in CDs, and that actually consists of 97 CDs. Okay, so I've got additional information here now. Well, now that I know how to add these additional calculations, I could actually just keep putting more in here, right? Maybe I'd like to know the average, right? This sum is huge, and it's nice to know that we had 97, but what was the average size of those deposits? Well, easy enough. I'm going to grab amount. I'm going to drop it on there again. Now, mine keeps defaulting to count. Normally it defaults to sum. I have no idea why it's doing this. Yay, Excel, right? Excel is still tipsy. All right. Well, all I got to do is come down here to the second count of amount that's been added, click the drop down, go to value field settings, and show me an average. Say OK. Now, just like with all things, when we add the values in here, of course, we're probably going to want to format this one. So those averages are looking those look a little icky. So let's go back into the value field settings, number format. Let's put it in accounting. Say OK. Much better. Now, the other thing to notice as we're kind of doing this is that these labels here are getting kind of clunky. Right? Notice it says sum of amount, count of amount, average of amount to. I don't like those. Those are kind of gross looking. Well, that is another setting that we can change. Let's go up to sum of amount, and let's click on its drop down over here and go to value field settings. And up at the top here, you can give this any name that you want. So maybe I'll call this total deposits and say OK. All right. And maybe on count of amount, we'll click that drop down. And instead of count of amount, we'll call this number of customers. Okay. And on the average of amount, we'll change that to average deposit. So I can label these anything that I want. Okay. Well, hey, let's keep going. Let's add a few more things here just for fun. All right. Let's add amount in again. And let's put in, let's say, well, what was the biggest one we had? Well, that's the max. So we'll call that largest deposit. Okay, and let's do the number format while we're here. Might as well take care of all this stuff. Okay, and one more, let's put in the smallest. Okay, click on the drop down, value field settings. We'll call that smallest deposit. That is a minimum calculation. We'll go to number format, accounting, say OK, and there we go. Oh, thought I changed the label there. Let's fix that. Smallest deposit. Okay, so I'm not limited to having a single calculation in a pivot table. I can actually keep adding all kinds of them and show it in one place. Maybe in the past you might have done these as separate pivot tables thinking, oh, well, if I want to have another calculation, it's got to go somewhere else. No, I can do all this in one place. Okay. So I can see the total of the deposits, the number of customers, what was the average, the largest and the smallest. So I've got all those calculations all in one place. And I can, by the way, I can move and sort these around. If I'd like this in a different order, like number of customers looks like it's in a weird spot. So again, I'll just drag that down. Okay, and that changes in all of them. By the way, down here, you'll notice that the subtotals and all this stuff are the totals are showing up down here at the bottom. If any of this is getting to be clutter or you don't like it, just come up here to the design tab of the pivot table tools. Look at the subtotals and the grand totals here. It depends on which ones you want to see. Right now, I think subtotals are all off. But under the grand totals, maybe I just want to see it for rows only. Maybe I don't want all that stuff down at the bottom, or maybe I just want the columns only. So you can choose, or maybe I don't want any of the grand totals all there at all. So you can pick and choose what you'd like to see. Let's do on for rows and columns, just to put that in there. Okay. All right. Let's take our calculations up another notch. Again, I'm just going to keep adding them to here. So looking at these numbers, this number here, the CDs, the 1.359 million, represents a certain fraction of this number, doesn't it? Like the total deposits. Maybe I would like to know what's the percentage that this represents. Okay, I've got this 1.359 million, and I'd really like to know of the overall grand total, what percentage does that represent? What percentage of the overall total does that represent? Well, once again, I'm going to drop amount onto the pivot table. I'm going to click its drop down and go to value field settings. And now I'm going to click on the other tab that's here. Instead of summarize values by, I'm going to go to show values as. And under the show values as, I got a bunch of other things that I can do here. And in the first off, I've got a drop down here. Right now it says no calculation, but if I drop this down, there are all kinds of options here. A majority of them are related to percentages. So I've got things like percent of grand total, percent of the column, percent of the row, percent of parent row. Those get into if you've got subtotals and subgroups and so on and so forth. Percent differences, running totals, ranking, indexes. You got all kinds of other additional calculations that we can do here with the numbers without, again, writing any formulas. So I would like to know the percent of the row total, right? Percent of row total. And I'm going to say, and let's go into number format while we're here. And once again, it's a percentage. Okay, that's fine. Say okay. And I want to call this percent of total. Say okay. And there we go. Actually, that's a little, let's tune that up a little bit. Let's say percent of row. Probably want something more descriptive than that later. Basically now what I know is that this amount here is 26.8% of that number up over here, because we're analyzing this row. So now I know for each one of these numbers what percent that represents going across the row. Okay. What if I wanted to go the other way? Yet another calculation. Let me take amount. Let's drop it down here again. And let's do value field settings. I'll call this percent of column. Okay. Show values as. I want to do percent of column total. All right. Say okay. And there we go. Now that's the column. So for all of the CDs, all right, this amount here is 45.97% of this number, right? So I'm sorry, this number is 45.97% of this number. Okay. And you can get more and more into this with, I can add then there's other percentages. We're just doing these by rows. What about the overall that it represents? One more time. Let's throw in amount again. And let's say I would like to know percent of all. Terrible label, but that's fine. Show values as percent of grand total. Say OK. So now I've got all kinds of analyses about stuff that's going on here, and I didn't have to write one single formula at all. So now I know, and again, better labels, if I was really doing this the right way, you would come up with maybe some better labels here. What I know now is from the central branch with its CDs, all right, I know that there was 1.359 million total deposits. The average was 14,000. The biggest one I got was 90,000. The smallest one I got was 2,000. There were 97 deposits, CD deposits at the central branch. This amount here, the 1.359 million, represents 26.8% of the overall grand total of deposits at the central branch. The 1.359 million also represents 45.9% of the total CDs that we got everywhere. So this branch did really well. Okay, it's got the 45.97%. Lastly, this number, the 1.359 million. Oh, what did I just do? Oh, I switched spreadsheets. Oh, I got a panic there for a second. What the heck? Lastly, this 1.359 million is 13.62% of this number over here. Look at all the calculations that I am able to come with and analyses that I can do, and I didn't have to write any formulas at all to come up with all that information. And all of it is in the same pivot table. This is actually a really cool analysis. I've done a whole lot here without a whole lot of work, just by dropping the same thing over and over and over into the pivot table. That's really the trick here with adding the additional calculations, is that I can put in sums, counts, averages, max, mins, lots of different variations of percentages into there. I mean, that's just 3 of the different percentages. There's all kinds of, under the value field settings, I could do, we can get into doing percentages of, there's one here called percentage of. You can actually then get into specifics of the base fields and the items. Oh my goodness, I don't even want to touch that right now. It's nuts. I think a lot of the ones you'd actually want are already in here. Just make sure you're reading these properly. But there are just myriad calculations that you can do without a lot of effort. I could throw this together in probably about 15 minutes, and this is a very comprehensive analysis of all the stuff that I've got here in this pivot table from the raw data. And these are the types of things that a manager or a vice president or somebody are going to totally geek out over, like, wow, how did you come up with all this? I'm like, ancient Chinese secret. Right? So hopefully you can see here the ease that we get of being able to just come up with additional calculations, that we can add as many of these things into a pivot table as we want. Okay. All right, well, I don't want to open up any further cans of worms in our examples. So we've covered tonight sorting, grouping, and additional calculations. As a quick little preview for the advanced class, here are some of the things that we'll do in the advanced class. Now, hopefully by the time you're watching this video, the advanced one is already posted on YouTube. So if you'd like a little preview of what's in the advanced video, here are some of the things that we're going to look at in that one. We're going to look at calculated fields and calculated items. We'll look at what are slicers and timelines. They're just fancy kinds of filters. We'll look at how to view the details behind a value. We'll take a look at pivot charts. how to use pivot table data in other formulas, and then we'll really dig into some of the other types of options and things that are in pivot tables. All right, that's all I got for tonight. Thank you everyone for attending. Now just hold the line here. I'm going to wrap up the recording and then I'll open it up to questions. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned something new with your pivot tables. Again, if you haven't watched the intro video, please watch that one. And if you have, great. Go on to the advanced and look at some of the other topics that we've got there. Appreciate you coming, and I hope to see you all at another session. Thanks.